So we're going to get started in just a moment. Hey, everyone. We have the amazing Beth and Amanda, who I didn't realize were besties until we just got on together. And they didn't even realize they're going to be on this webinar together until about a minute ago. So this should be a great show. We're going to go a little more data heavy today and look at some really incredible Firefly data that Beth and her really talented data team assembled for us that tells a pretty important story, I think, about the current state of the world, not just in terms of restaurants, but the way that we live life post-COVID. Before that, we probably just need a couple of minutes to get started. You know, it takes people like a couple minutes to file in. And I had installed Stable Diffusion, which is one of those AI image generators locally, so I could start doing things a little more quickly for my desktop. And it makes really amazing art, right? Look at this one. So this is a high-res image of a group of black pugs praying to a giant burrito, and this is what it came up with. So they're not really praying; they're more like they become part of the burrito in a way. But I mean, this looks like real art, doesn't it? I mean, this looks like something you'd see hang. It's amazing, right?
Did you come up with that concept?
Yeah, you just type in whatever you want, and it makes something for you. So it didn't search the internet for this. It created this in a matter of seconds. So I said, well, this is a little bit weird. I really like Persian food. So what if it was, you know, black pugs eating Persian food, and it made this thing? Like, it's sort of amazing, right? You can sort of see like the pulverized sort of meat. You can see like sort of the background of all the rice, like all the shadows and light. I mean, this looks like a legit painting, and it can do some really, really remarkable stuff as well. So we took this reference image of Gordon Ramsay, and you could actually tell it to change an existing image. You could even make it start to animate things now. The technology is progressing so incredibly fast that the stuff that's possible today is going to be made obsolete by the stuff that's possible in probably just 2 or 3 weeks from now. Like, that community is growing and advancing things so incredibly quickly. So we just did something basic. We say, hey, let's take Gordon Ramsay and let's see if we could just change him in a few ways. And it's literally just typing in a few words and flipping a couple of switches, and the generator does the rest. So here's actual Gordon Ramsay. Here's him as a teenager via the AI. You here to see how close this actually looks to what he actually looked like as a teenager. Here's an older Gordon Ramsay. And again, these each took maybe a few seconds to create. Here's him mixed with a little bit of Tom Cruise. You could probably see a little bit of that in the eyes, and probably some other facial structures. Let's see, got a couple more here. The left is Gordon Ramsay with a medium dose of Bobby Flay brought in, and then I, moved the slider up a little bit further and did more Bobby Flay on the right. But I mean, this stuff is just incredible, isn't it? Let's see, we got a couple more. I mean, I don't know if any of you have comments in chat. I mean, I'm really blown away by this. Here's super sad Gordon Ramsay. This is Gordon Ramsay on his absolute worst day. We have, look at this. You can do Gordon Ramsay as a Renaissance painting. So it changed him, it changed his outfit, it changed his background. It like made the food a little bit different as well. Put like, I don't know, some weird Renaissance type stuff on his desk. It's incredible. You can do him as Disney style art. I mean, these are literally just writing a couple of words into a prompt and letting the AI magic take care of the rest. Here he is, Street Fighter style. I mean, so pretty much any art style that you can imagine, the AI has been trained against, and you could have it replicate your favorite artist, your favorite type of art, your favorite style of photography, you name it. Street art, if you want to do graffiti style. And this all came from one picture, and we just said, hey, let's spin it a few different ways. Here's evil Gordon Ramsay. This is the version of Gordon Ramsay you don't want to mess with, or you don't want to encounter in a dark alley. And like, who knows what this mystery food, they even made the food look sort of evil in some way. Like, this is not an inviting thing. So I think it's really, really pretty awesome stuff. If you ever get a chance to check out one of the online image generators, you can, or if you want to take the plunge and install something locally, you can try installing Stable Diffusion and do some stuff on your own machine. It's really quite incredible. Okay, so that is our attempt at killing 2 to 3 minutes of time and letting people file into the webinar. So hey, everyone, looks like you're mostly here now. Fantastic. Just as a reminder, you have a chat button. I would like to encourage you all to hit that chat button right now and just remind everyone across the world of food where you are chatting in from. And I don't know, did you have a favorite Gordon Ramsay that you just saw? I liked a few of them myself. I actually like it when you can blend one face with another, because you see these, like, I mean, it's not creepy. It's just fascinating, right? You start seeing like what makes someone look like someone, and the AI captures it very well. So please hit chat. Make sure you choose everyone when you hit chat. Tell us where you're coming in from, what city you're in, and anything else you want to share, or if you can't think of anything, just tell us which Gordon Ramsay you like best and say hi to all your colleagues around the industry. So we are joined today by two really spectacular people. We have Beth, who's part of the data team, and her team assembled a really remarkable amount of analysis around what's happened in the restaurant industry since COVID, and more specifically, what's happened with restaurant operating hours. We're going to look at a deep dive of that data, and I think it reveals some very important truths about where we are, not just as an industry, but as a society and culture, and how we live our lives today. And Amanda is a prominent member of our customer experience team, and she knows a lot about everything. I've worked with Amanda on, I don't know, maybe 100 projects to date. So I actually gave her the tough job. I said, Amanda, I want you to come on today and with zero preparation. You won't even know what the topic is, but because you are so good at just knowing things, we're going to ask you for hot takes as we go. So Amanda, you are in the hot seat, but I think it's one you occupy very, very gracefully.
I'll do my best.
Yeah, you're going to be great. Okay, so just as a reminder, we have some great new content in Report Pro. I mean, there's just a ton of stuff. Every day there's a new report or two that's been added to Report Pro. You could, and I wanted to just maybe spotlight a few things that you should be checking out. If you haven't already, I believe the majority of you have Report Pro subscriptions of, in some way, shape, or form right now. So there's a ton of content that's available to you, and I'd recommend you check out a few of these. So one is a great creative concepts issue on what the next generation of C-stores look like. And if you'll remember, pre-COVID, for a few years, C-stores were already undergoing a pretty amazing transformation where they started to become a little bit more like QSRs, a little bit more even like fast casual restaurants. Then COVID hit and a lot of things sort of stopped, but we're starting to see a resumption of that, and we're seeing some really interesting next-gen C-store design and menu offering that's going to give the restaurant industry a pretty good run for its money. So if you want to see what that's all about, check out this creative concepts on next-gen C-stores. On our last webinar, we covered sustainability. There's a lot more where that came from. You'll find it in our sustainability keynote. It is over 100 pages of fantastic content on everything having to do with, all the broad topics that make up sustainability. And as we talked about last time, that's a lot of different, issues that fall under that sustainability umbrella. You'll find them all covered in this keynote. And a really great new inspiration report on sandwiches. So we saw a little slowdown with sandwiches during COVID. We've seen a resumption, and sandwiches are in fact still getting quite interesting and quite creative. And there's definitely old school style sandwiches, and you have the new school sandwiches that consumers are really clamoring for today. And you'll find it all in here, Middle Eastern sandwiches, plant-forward sandwiches, all the different types of regional sandwiches. If you're doing anything in that category or providing ingredients that go into a sandwich, you want to make sure you check that out. And finally, there's a look at what we call fun and freaky LTOs that you definitely should take a look at. This is in a part of our Food Bites series. We really wanted to explore what's happening with all the interesting, unique LTOs that have been surfacing for quite some time, and that we want to continue pushing forward as an industry. We've said many times that the thing that makes consumers want to get food from a restaurant is because restaurant food is just more craveable and more interesting than the stuff you can get at home. So following that line of uniqueness becomes really important if we want to continue to grow food services share of stomach. And for those of you on the retail side, there's a whole lot of inspiration you can draw from this issue as well. So here are a couple of things you'll actually find in that Food Bites report on funky and unique LTOs, right? So we actually looked at our scores data, and scores is essentially an ongoing tracker of everything that chain restaurants release and what consumers think of those items. Is it something they would order? Do they think it's really unique or not? And we looked at that and a number of other measures, and we looked at uniqueness as a key measure. We said, well, what are some of the most unique things that chain restaurants have launched in the last 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, and 3 years? And you could see these broken out in this report across a few different categories, right? All the different interesting and unique pizza-related executions, whether it's this artisan hand-stretched shrimp scampi pizza that you'll find at Bertucci's, or the fiery maple and squash pizza that you'll find at Blaze, or the pepperoni pizza egg sandwich now. So they used to have a pepperoni pizza bagel. Now they got pepperoni pizza egg sandwich at Einstein Brothers. Or you can see all the things that are happening with pickles, from the famous pickle juice slush you'll find at Sonic, which is amazing, to these smothered barbecue brisket chips at Red Robin, to Blue Moon fried pickles at Dave & Buster's, and so on and so on. But I thought for the first couple of minutes today, we could maybe explore this in a little more detail. So here's a screenshot from Scores, and it covers almost 40,000, essentially the totality of everything that chain restaurants have released over the past several years, with each month about another 300 or 400 new items. And we said, well, can we look at some of these things that are really, really unique, and what are those items? And we wanted to share a few, but I wanted to remind us of an important finding too, that for a long time now, we've seen the level of perceived uniqueness of food items increase month over month over month over month, even throughout the COVID period, right? So the green line here is the average rated uniqueness of all the different things that chain restaurants have released, going back in this chart to the beginning of 2017. And the number just sort of keeps going up and up and up and up. There's sort of this upward ascent. But as we got into the beginning of this year, we started to see a little bit of a shift away from that. And our caution to the industry is we don't want to give up our uniqueness. I know there's going to be a lot of just automatic reactive motivation to do more, value pricing or deals or something because consumers are fighting inflation and an uncertain economy. But if we do that at the expense of innovation and uniqueness, I think we start shooting ourselves in the foot as an industry, which is basically the same shot in the foot that we got following the financial crisis of 2008, 2009. So just word of advice, let's see if we can avoid that and continue doing unique things. So this is fascinating. Each one of these dots is, I think we're looking at, let's say, the last 3 months of new items launched at chain restaurants. Each one of these dots is a different item. And what we did is we plotted them across 2 dimensions. One of them is purchase intent, which is whether consumers want to order that item. The other is the perceived uniqueness of the item. And what you sort of look for when you do this is like, well, do you see any patterns? Do they all sort of follow a straight line or not? Well, when you see this, there is no pattern. It's completely random. And the correlation between purchase intent and uniqueness for the last couple of years effectively is about 0, right? Just because something is more unique doesn't mean that people want to buy it more or buy it less. This is different than what you see in retail. If you look at CPG products, typically there's a negative correlation between purchase intent and uniqueness. When something gets too unique, people become scared of it and they don't want to buy it as a retail product. In food service or in restaurants, that's not the case, right? You could have something ultra unique and it won't have a negative impact. It might even have a positive impact on purchase intent. And I think that's our story here, is that we could think about uniqueness as a way to perhaps amplify what people want to buy, or at least give them, a place that they can get something they can't get anywhere else, without necessarily negatively impacting purchase intent. So more so in food service and restaurants than in retail, having uniqueness tends to be a really good thing. At a minimum, it's a differentiator. At its maximum, you've actually built something that perhaps even enhances your purchase interest. So here's some things that we've seen in Scores recently that have really high levels of uniqueness, which we think are great. The barbacoa quesadilla Benedict, this one's that first watch, and what this does, and it's something we've talked about a lot, is it practices this concept that we call fused ubiquity, which is you take a ubiquitous item like a Benedict, and then you infuse it with other things that are maybe less familiar or certainly not normally combined with that underlying ubiquitous item, right? So fused ubiquity is taking a pizza and turning it into a Korean barbecue pizza. Here we've done that with a Benedict, and we brought in a quesadilla, which is common, but not normally within the context of a Benedict, and barbacoa, which may be a little bit less known to people. And we've taken a safe item like a Benedict and made it really interesting and appealing. Or the asparagus fries at Cheesecake Factory scored really well on uniqueness. Or this is really interesting too, the maple sugar snack and bacon at Dunkin'. This is awesome, right? You just walk around with this thing, you'd be eating bacon all day, which is fantastic. And this scored extremely high uniqueness as well. So I would just recommend think unique, check out that latest edition of Food Bites, check out all the uniqueness and scores, and you could actually, inside scores, sort by the uniqueness column and see the most unique items over whatever period of time that you're looking to search. So I think this is the last year we're looking at over here, but you could do last month, 3 months, year, 2 years, 3 years, all time, whatever you want to do. Okay, so with that out of the way, we're going to shift gears and talk about really exciting new Firefly data that I think has some pretty profound implications for the industry and just maybe causes me to rethink how we're all living life and how I'm living my life and what that means. So to give you a little background for those of you that aren't as familiar with Firefly, it's our database that tracks essentially every place that serves food in the US and in Canada, and also now across the world by virtue of our acquisition of a company called CHD. And I'll talk about that in just a moment. But you could do sort of everything over here. You can look at every restaurant, every convenience store, every hospital cafeteria, find out details, profiles about them, look at what they look like inside, view their menu, search across those menus, build a targeted list that you want to sell against. It's really quite remarkable what Firefly contains. And it gives you sort of a total view of the restaurant landscape. But today we're going to focus on just the USA. Globally, I think we now cover 60 plus countries, but I wanted to focus on just the US because that's what we probably care most about in this particular webinar, and look at what's happened to the restaurant industry since COVID. So here's the start, and this is where audience participation comes in. I want you all to take your best guess. There's 2 blanks that you see on this screen. So since February 2020, so since right before COVID, has the number of US restaurants, has it shrunk or grown? So those are your 2 options. And then by what percentage? So you're gonna, in chat, write the word either shrunk or grown, and then add a number to that as to your guess as to how much it's either shrunk or grown. So I'd figure, Beth, Amanda, you guys can see chat as it scrolls by, right? So I can't see it for some reason in my view. Are we getting guesses?
We're getting lots of guesses, and we're getting lots of unique guesses. Trying to think if I see one that's
are they clustering?
I want to say it's slightly leaning towards shrunk at the moment.
It's leaning towards shrunk. And how about the numbers themselves? Is it a wide range, or are they all pretty tightly clustered together?
I'm seeing a lot of teens.
Yeah,
teens.
A lot of teens.
So would you say that if you're just eyeballing it, is that sort of like the most common guess is that it's the total number of US restaurants has been reduced by something in the teens?
Yes.
Yes.
So that's interesting. Okay, well, I guess we can maybe just do a quick unveil as to what the actual answer is. So did anyone guess grown?
We did get some grown, yeah.
Was that like maybe 5% of the vote, or?
I think it was up a little bit higher than that, like
Okay.
30% of the vote, maybe.
Really? Oh, we have
Yeah.
a very optimistic group. Okay, so the answer is grown is not the answer. There actually has been a shrinkage in the total number of units, but that number is 3.9%. So we dropped from about 822,000 restaurants pre-COVID to about 790,000 today. And I don't know if Beth, if you had any commentary on that, or if you want to wait until we get into the month-over-month data.
I mean, I think what's great about this number is I was expecting it to be shrunk by a lot more than 4%.
Yeah.
I think we all were. So this was a really happy number for us to get to, and we finally got to look into the data, and the month-over-month stuff is pretty interesting too.
Well, it's interesting because you'll remember there were all these headlines, I think like NRA and other, organizations and said, hey, 80% of all restaurants are going to close and some will never open back up and those spaces will be empty forever. You hear all that, but then you sort of think about, it depends on, I guess, where you are, but if you just drive around or look around, it's like, yeah, that's still a restaurant in that space right there. So it is about 4%, 3.9%. So we do have fewer units than we did pre-COVID. Now, keep in mind, this doesn't mean that only 3.9% of restaurants closed. It means that on net, if you add back in all the new restaurants that opened, in addition to that, you get to a net change of a shrinkage of 3.9%, which is actually still fairly consequential, right? I mean, we have fewer restaurants today than we used to, is the bottom line. And it's interesting, Beth, I mean, do you want to maybe take us through this chart? So we plotted 2 lines. The green line is month over month, the number of new restaurant openings each month that we see in Firefly. And the red line is the number of permanent restaurant closures. What are you seeing here?
So the biggest thing that sticks out to me is that big spike in closures right around March, April 20, and that's when the government announced it as a pandemic. So we use the date, I think March 13th might have been the date when it was actually declared a pandemic. And we had an extremely high number of closures that month. Mostly we saw a lot of our larger chains shedding units. And I think just in March alone, we dropped maybe 14,000 restaurant units over 30 days. So it's pretty significant.
Yeah, certainly significant. And I guess the way you can maybe view this is, you know, what is the relative position of the green line versus the red line? When the green line, can you see my mouse when I wiggle this thing around? When the green line is above the red line, that means that we're seeing expansion in the industry in terms of the number of restaurants that exist. And when the green line is below the red line, we're seeing contraction. I don't think this is very surprising to many of us, right? We knew that we were in an era of expansion leading into COVID, and we've been in a prolonged era of contraction since, right? The green line has still not made it above the red line since COVID. But the most interesting thing to me here is not just that the green line is still lower. It's really everything happening in this sort of ovaled area over here. So the bars that you see underneath, can you see these like really faint gray bars or gray columns? So that's the total amount of activity each month. It's restaurant openings plus closures, and it's actually plotted on a different axis, but I didn't want to confuse things with too many numbers. Just know that when the bar is higher, that means you had more openings and closings combined. When it's lower, you had fewer openings and closings combined. If you look at what's happened since, let's say, the end of last year, there's been a downward trend for quite some time, and we just aren't seeing nearly as much activity as we used to. We aren't seeing as many closures and openings together as we used to. And I think, to me, what that sort of suggests is sort of like in this period of like where operators and business owners are sort of uncertain, and it's sort of a period of stagnation where we're not seeing really rapid declines in, you know, in the number of restaurants. We aren't seeing way more closures than we are openings, you know, like we did during early COVID. We're seeing a lot of people like doing nothing right now. And this could be related to the labor shortage. Maybe they're having a hard time opening up. It could just be nervousness about the economy. But we're sort of in like a wait and see period, I think, which is why you see this lowering of bars over here on the right.
Well, if you think about it too, when you're looking at the runway to opening a restaurant, that's going to be a couple years out.
Yep.
And during that period, that's when we were seeing all these closures happening. So I think that had something to do with
Yes,
why
it could have been people got freaked out by COVID, didn't start their opening plans, and now we're sort of in that catch-up period as well, certainly. So I want to maybe take us through a quick piece of math so that we can understand what we're about to see on the next chart. So if we look at Japanese restaurants since COVID, so just Japanese and sushi places, we had 2,700 new Japanese restaurants open during that period. We had about 3,700 that permanently closed. So you had sort of like a net of, you know, almost 1,000 net closures. But if you sort of look at just those two numbers relative to each other, 2,700 and 3,700, closures is the bigger piece of that number, right? It's a bigger share. It's more than 50% of that number. The next chart I'm going to show us looks at what that sort of ratio of openings to closures looks like across all different types of restaurant cuisines. And I'm going to start by showing us a dot chart right here. So here we could see on the bottom axis the percentage of new restaurant activity that are restaurant openings, and on the axis going up and down, it's percentage that are closures. Each one of these dots is a different cuisine type of restaurant. And if you sort of draw this sort of diagonal line, if you could see it going from the bottom left to the upper right, that's sort of like your 1-to-1 ratio. So if you're sitting exactly on this line, that means that type of restaurant opened just as much as it closed. If you're sitting below the line, that means you had more openings than closings. And if you sit above the line, all these orange dots, you had more closings than openings. Does that sort of make sense? Amanda, this is a good time for a hot take because that was probably really confusing. And to a smart person, did what I just said make any sense at all?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, you make me feel much better about myself. Thank you.
Okay.
So we can look, here's Japanese on that continuum. Like that's an example we just saw with the 3,700 and 2,700. And you could sort of see these green dots where we had more openings than closings. And there's only 6 of them, right, out of all the different types of restaurants. And it's juice smoothie, 7 juice smoothie places, African restaurants, vegetarian restaurants, wing places, Caribbean restaurants, brew pubs, and wine bars. Everything else is sort of in this zone over here. But I would ask, can you all guess what this dot is over here that I'm circling my mouse around, where you just had way more closures than openings? What type of restaurant might this be?
We're getting a lot of right answers in the chat bar.
And what is that?
I'm seeing a lot of buffet.
Yeah, it is in fact buffet over here. And you can sort of see what this looks like across all the different types of cuisine. So only the 7 on the left here saw a net gain in units, and all the ones over here on the right lost units. And you can see buffet. You got like buffet is pretty far down the list. Then you have like some other weird ones. Like I think Mongolian is basically probably a buffet as well. I mean, are there many Mongolian restaurants that aren't a Mongolian barbecue where you go up and build your bowl? I think that's probably the vast majority of them. Swiss fondue is sort of an interesting one because there's probably only one Swiss fondue restaurant in the world, so it's probably a sample size of one chain in this case. I don't know what's up with the British places though, but you can see what's gained and what's lost. And I would really focus on this vegetarian special diet place because that really did buck the trend. I don't think this is like, hey, an immunity restaurant or something that was COVID related. It's just that we saw so much growth in this for so long that not even COVID could take down the vegetarian and special diet types of places. So I wanted to apologize because if you thought maybe that last dot chart was a little confusing, I'm probably going to confuse you a little bit more. I'm going to do my best to try not to do that. So Amanda, if I say anything that doesn't sound right coming out of my mouth, if you could fix it for me, that would be fantastic. So apologies for all the dots that you are about to see. All right, let's take a look at this. We have different states over here. This is on the bottom axis, right? Going from left to right, this your x-axis over here at the bottom. It's restaurants that opened since April of 2020, right? So we went a month past the start of COVID to do this particular view. And on the left, going left axis going up and down, it's percentage of restaurants that closed since April 2020. And on average, you have more closures than you do openings. So we don't have the exact same start and end of the axes so that we could fit everything on this chart and have the dots all be visible to everyone. But we drew sort of a line over here that sort of shows like what's sort of the best fit across states, right? And generally speaking, when you have more openings, you also have more closures because someplace closes and then yet another restaurant will pop up in its place, right? It's probably like more of a real estate driven type of a thing. But there's some really interesting stuff that happened during this time, and and what you want to find are things that veer off that sort of predicted shaded line that we have in the middle over here. Like, what are the dots that just don't fit that line? And there's a few of them. Let's see if I forget if we. Oh, and maybe we can just talk about some of these. So, one, you have Florida and Texas, which obviously get talked about together in the same breath quite a lot. They had substantially more openings than closures during COVID. And then you have places like DC. I guess it's not technically a state, but I don't know what else you call it in this chart. That is so far off this line, right? I mean, if you look at the number of openings that it had, I mean, it should have been way in a much different place. It should be all the way down here where my cursor is, but it's up here. There's so many more closures and openings. So what that sort of suggests is a restaurant went out of business. The real estate for that restaurant is still there. The space is still there, and just no one else came in to occupy it, right? Whereas if you look at, let's say, Texas, for instance, there probably wasn't a pre-existing restaurant in a lot of those locations, right? It was just like maybe it was a brand new space or a brand new build out that was made into a restaurant. But in places like DC, some of those spaces just didn't get filled in. And the things that sort of veered most off this line above it, where you had way more closures than openings, or at least that what you would predict there to be, are places like DC, New York, Hawaii. Massachusetts is so interesting. And I think this one perplexed us, and we actually don't know the answer to this. So could someone in chat tell us not just why there were maybe, decent number of closures in Massachusetts, but why were there so few new restaurant openings, period? It's the lowest of all the states, right? It's the furthest left dot on this entire chart. I don't really know the Massachusetts area very well, but what was unique about it that it had, way fewer restaurant openings than, even DC or something?
I'm seeing some answers in here that really make a lot of sense for what we do know about Massachusetts and what we also know about big cities with variable populations and lots of commuters. Massachusetts, first of all, had a significant population decline. A lot of people moved out, specifically in Boston, and they are still having a pretty hard time recovering their lunch crowd.
So
they're suffering in the same way that like LA is suffering, and New York, for example, where you don't have people coming to the office every day.
So it's just like, it's a bad economic climate to open something up in, right? That's what we saw like in the Chicago Loop in the early days of COVID as well, right? There's just no people there. And then Delaware was the other interesting one that we sort of bandied about internally at Datassential, because I don't know much about Delaware. I don't think I've ever been there, but I'm like, why is Delaware so different than a lot of these other sort of like northeastern states? And I think, Beth, was the theory that some people leave other states to do stuff in Delaware they couldn't do at home, or where did we land on that?
So I grew up outside of DC in Bethesda, Maryland, and Delaware was the vacation spot to go to when I was a kid. And some people theorize that folks were reticent to travel long distances during the pandemic. And so Delaware the Eastern Shore is a very quick drive from Maryland, Virginia, Pennsylvania. So a lot of the people who would have been traveling elsewhere went there. And their tourism economy is actually doing really well right now. It's outpacing their pre-pandemic demand for lodging and restaurants, even in spite of inflation and labor shortages.
That makes sense, because my first instinct is like, oh, Delaware is probably going to look just like DC, but it's really the exact opposite for the reasons you just said, I think. Okay. Actually, wait, we're here. Here's Colorado, Amanda. I mean, just what are you seeing in your neighborhood? Does it feel like things are sort of more opening than closing where you are, or have
I
been?
think slightly. There's a lot of cyclical opening and closing. Like there's a lot of restaurants filling in restaurants that close, but we do have some new builds and new growth for sure. A lot of regional chains in Colorado as well, growing pretty quickly.
Yep, for sure. So we then thought, well, geez, we could go. This is what makes the Firefly Data so amazing, and the work that Beth and her team is just so stupendous, because they went and said, well, let's not just look at states or even just big metro areas. Let's look at individual zip codes. So we've plotted about, I don't know, there's 30,000 plus zip codes across the US. I think we plotted maybe 10,000 of the largest ones in this chart. And you could see same type of chart, right? It's like, where are you in comparison to the line? This is a one-to-one line between openings and closing. So if you're below this line, you've opened more restaurants than you've closed. And if you're above the line, you've closed more restaurants than you've opened. And each dot is a zip code. And the size of the dot corresponds with how many restaurants are in that zip code. So you might have, this is, something over here at this end of the scale where there's very, very few openings and very, very few closures. I'm like, what the heck kind of place is this, where there's like nothing going on? Like it's like, minimally impacted in terms of restaurant openings and closures since COVID. And it turns out this is sort of like Disney, like the entire Disney area in Orlando, right? Where it's, theme park restaurants, it's Disney Springs. I mean, those restaurants sort of are what they are. There's not a lot of sort of independent restaurant activity there. Then you have over here on the opposite end of the spectrum, where you have a boatload of activity, the 33127 zip code. So if any of you have not been to the design district, the Wynwood area of Miami, I highly recommend it. It is the cool part of town right now. It's where all the interesting stuff is happening. It's where the entire art scene, sort of takes place. You can see all the amazing graffiti on the walls, all these new restaurants are opening up. So there you saw a lot of openings and closures, because so many of the older businesses were closing to make way for this brand new development in the design district of Miami. Then you have something like this. This is a bigger dot over here. This is a pretty big dot. And this is the East Village in New York City. And you'd find that most of the Manhattan zip codes are going to be very, very similar to this one, where you just had a lot more closures than you did openings. It's a big zip code, but openings were much less common than closures were. And this is true of most of Manhattan. You could see some other examples. The downtown area of St. Paul, an unbelievable number of closures. We think this is, mostly COVID, but there could be some other factors that play into this. So if any of you know the St. Paul area or from there and want to comment on what the heck is going on over there and why this dot is so incredibly high, we'd love to hear it. Or the financial district of LA, downtown LA, where all the big office buildings are, where just no one was going to, for exactly the things that Amanda and Beth were just saying. There's no people around. There's not going to be a whole lot of restaurants to open. So that explains some of the more closures than opening dots. Then on the other side, you have some places that I don't know that well. I've been to Atlanta a bunch of times, but I don't know, like the West Side area, I guess they call it, of Atlanta. 30318 is a zip code where this thing veers so far off the line. There's so many more openings than there are closures in this particular zip code. So if anyone in chat knows Atlanta well, or knows this zip code area, the West Side, and what's going on over there, I'd actually love an explanation for what's happening there. And then you could see some other areas that veer very, very far off the line as well, where you're getting way more openings and closings. Was Waco, Texas, Gallatin, Tennessee, and Goodyear, Arizona being just some of those examples. But you could see, COVID has not, COVID and the aftermaths of COVID have not impacted the country uniformly across different geographies. We've had really, really different patterns of activity in each separate market, all the way down to individual neighborhoods and zip codes. So do we have anyone in chat that can theorize what's happening in either St. Paul or Atlanta? Anyone have an idea? I can't see the chat, so I have no idea what people are
We've
typing.
got some comments on Atlanta, just having the West Side specifically having a ton of development. It used to be a really industrial area, and now it's getting more developed. Kind of sounds like West Loop in Chicago a little bit.
It's a new area. Okay, that makes
Yeah.
sense. All right, so since COVID, restaurant closures outpaced new openings, but with really different regional effects, and that's what Beth and her team uncovered. And I wanted to maybe just ask a separate question, which will get us into the real meat of today's discussion, which is think about restaurants around you that just, you drive around. When you see restaurants around you, does it feel to you like restaurants are staying open later than they used to compared to pre-COVID? Or does it feel like they're closing earlier than they used to pre-COVID? So obviously we had a period of time where, every restaurant closed, during COVID, or they had special hours, but now that we're sort of in this new normal stage, are restaurants closing earlier than they used to or staying open later? So this is, well, let me ask you both this. Amanda, do you think that we were getting a balanced vote right now, or is it a one-sided vote?
It is a very one-sided vote.
So that's interesting. And it is so one-sided, I'm going to cut off voting right now because it makes no sense. Sort of like, election night, where like after the first returns come in, it's like 99-1. Okay, we're done. We can call it. So we can call this 95-5. This audience thinks that restaurants are closing earlier. Now, we do know this audience is smart, but not always right, because 30% thought that the number of restaurants actually increased since COVID. So what do you guys think? Do you think they're closing earlier? Well, Beth, I'm not going to ask you because you know the answer. Do you think restaurants are closing earlier, or do you think they're staying open later, Amanda?
Definitely, I've noticed closing earlier, and I've actually run into the situation where I'll like go up to a restaurant and they'll just have a sign on the door that's like, "Hey, sorry, we're closing at 6 p.m. today."
Yep.
I'm assuming it's labor issues.
It's oftentimes that, and the answer is yes, they are closing earlier, and we want to talk about this and some of the details, and we call it the Great Shortening, or it's really, really quite stark. Restaurants are just working shorter hours than we've ever seen them before. So we have two lines over here. The red line is the year 2022, today, basically, and the blue line is 2019, pre-COVID. And we picked Wednesday just for this chart. We could do this for Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, combination of all, but we use Wednesday just so we have something very specific to look at, because sometimes restaurants are closed on Mondays, but usually they're open on Wednesdays, right? And this is the percentage of restaurants that are open at each time of the day over the 24 hours that constitute a typical Wednesday. And you can see the red line is today and the blue line is 2019. In many times of the day, the blue line is above the red line. Now, when you get to the middle of the day, like lunch, there's really not that much of a change. But when you get to the later parts of the day, the impact is a little bit more severe. So I thought we could talk about a couple of those different hours of the day and just see what the actual impact is. So let's say you wanted to grab lunch, breakfast at 7:45 on your way to work. Well, before, let's say about 31% of restaurants would have been open to you at that time. Now it's down to about 27.5%. So about a 3.3% gap between 2019 and 2022. You want to grab lunch, 12:45, sort of it's semi-late lunch, I guess. It's pretty much the same, like 95.4 versus 93.8, not much of a difference. But as we get later into the day, the effects become more pronounced. At 5:45, so early dinner, you have almost a 6% gap. 9:45, you have a 15% gap. And that's the big thing. It's what you said, Amanda. It's like places all of a sudden saying, we got to close at 8 or 9 where we used to close at 10 or 11. That is a big, big change. And if we were to quantify this, it looks like this. The percentage of restaurants that have expanded their hours, it's not zero, but it's not a majority, since COVID is 19.8% versus 59% that have reduced their hours over that same period of time. It is the great shortening of restaurant hours. And to put it in a little bit of context, pre-COVID, restaurants were open on average 85 hours per week. Now, this includes all the 24-hour restaurants, so that's like 168 hours, just for those. So those bring the average up. But on average, across all restaurants, it was 85 hours per week. Today, it's 78.6. That's 6.4 fewer hours each week per open restaurant, which is about 7.5%, a 7.5% reduction over what it was previously. So if you're one of those restaurants and you're open 7.5% fewer hours than you used to be, that means you have to be about 8% more efficient in each hour that you are open to make up for that difference. A lot of it is about learning how to do more with less. And we can talk about some of the reasons as you theorized, Amanda, that it's about labor, and that's certainly a big piece of it. But this is not a small number. This is like an unprecedented change in how open things are. I don't think we can overstate how important or how meaningful this actually is. This is a big, big, big change. If we're talking about just one city or one zip code, fine, no big deal. We're talking about this across the US, and when we get to certain parts of the country, the effects are even way more pronounced than that. We've had a dramatic shift in the restaurant landscape, not just what's open and what's closing as we previously saw, but how long places are actually open for as well. Beth, did you have like a top quick reaction to this you wanted to share?
I mean, with the expanded hours, it makes a lot of sense. You have to remember that the top 500 restaurant chains make up about a quarter of our restaurant universe. So places that are going to be open 24 hours are really where you're seeing the expanded hours, and then some of the leveling off of places that didn't change.
Yeah, and look, you had some chains that used to be open 24 hours and went to non-24 hour schedules. Some of them are slowly trying to roll back to 24 hours. Denny's would be a good example. On average, a Denny's today is open 30 hours fewer than it was in 2019. Now that gap should shrink as more of them return back to 24-hour service, but it's pretty dramatic. Then you actually had a small handful of chains that actually saw an increase in their hours. Wendy's is a good example because they happen to launch breakfast right in the immediate wave of COVID, and they just have more day parts now than they used to. But this is a pretty big decline, 6.4 fewer hours each week, equating to about 7.5%. And you can see the map for what this actually looks like. So the numbers here you see are the average reduction in weekly restaurant hours among open restaurants in each one of these states. And they're not all the same. They don't all say 6.4, right? You have some states that say as little as 1.7. You actually have one state over here, Alaska. It is the only state in the country that saw a net increase in the hours in which restaurants are open. The restaurants are open an extra 2.7 hours per week in Alaska. It stands alone. The other 49, or I guess 50, include DC, are all negative, and some of them are much more negative than others, as you can see here. So here's the actual numbers if you want to, not look at the map view. So DC, I mean, remember, DC had the most restaurant closures and very few restaurant openings. They also have the biggest reduction in restaurant hours among the places that did stay open. Vermont saw a big change in hours, Maine, New York, and this is at the state level. When we get to New York City, it gets even crazier. Connecticut, Minnesota, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, Michigan. And on the other end, Alaska stands alone, but you had some other states that sort of weathered the storm probably a little bit better: Arkansas, Indiana, Idaho, Iowa, Wyoming, Georgia. Now, I think we don't want to make any sort of a political statement, but it's hard not to recognize that you have probably a lot of states that sort of just try to stay open more during the pandemic that were less impacted. And those that probably had, broader sort of closures or lockdowns are the ones that are more impacted. That's not necessarily to say that one thing was better than the other. It could just be like, hey, if you had to reduce your staff and you had to shut down your restaurant a whole bunch, maybe it just takes you a longer time to staff back up, and they're in the process of doing that. We don't really know for sure, right, exactly what the cause is there, but there is certainly a correlation in terms of the actions that different states took and what the restaurant scene looks like right now. So we could look at this on a metro specific basis as well. So across all the different DMAs, there's about 211 metro areas across the US. And again, we have on one axis, the average number of hours that the restaurants there are open each week. This is sort of that bottom axis. And on the left, going up and down, we have how much that they've changed in their available restaurant hours. And this line in the middle is, the zero line. So if you're above the zero line, that means you had a net increase in restaurant weekly hours. And if you're below the line, as almost every metro is, it means you had a net decrease. What's sort of interesting is the stuff on the far right over here. Look, there's actually a couple of markets where you just have a whole lot of restaurants that are open a long time, not even getting into whether it changed since COVID, but in general, the restaurants are open more hours. And one of them is obvious, right? Everyone can probably guess that, Las Vegas is for sure going to be one of them. I didn't really get this other one though. Laredo, Texas. I know nothing about Laredo. I just know it's a border town, but is there anything else, I don't know, Beth, or in chat, that you could tell us about Laredo and why the restaurants are open so long?
So something I was finding when I was looking into some of the smaller towns to figure out why we were seeing more hours and more operators in them is places with colleges and universities. So some of these like really small ones where we were scratching our heads, you have more population certainty when you have a large school there. That
makes sense. Is some of it like that there's just more chain restaurants too, and a lot of those are open until midnight at the drive-through and whatnot, or was that not really a factor?
I mean, of course, that's going to be a factor anywhere where you're going to have a large population. You're going to have, more of that available, and especially to that demographic who's going to be hitting a 24-hour drive-through. Yep.
So if we highlight a few more, we could look at some of the metros where we actually saw increases in hours, and it's rare. There's 4 dots here. There's actually 2 that are sort of hidden behind the other 4. There's only 6 total metros out of 211 across the US that saw a net gain in weekly hours. And I want to maybe compare and contrast a couple. So on the one hand, you have places like Terre Haute, which actually saw an increase in restaurant hours. Then you have Springfield. I guess this maybe goes into our earlier Massachusetts comment, where here it didn't have a whole lot of hours in the first place. And on top of that, it saw a massive reduction, like nearly 12 hours a week, working off a pretty small base to start with. And then you have Burlington, which is really interesting because it had the fewest hours, to begin with, and still saw one of the biggest declines still on top of that. 14% fewer restaurant hours available in Burlington, Vermont, versus that minus 7.5% number that we saw nationally. But metros to me are not the story, because the metro is still pretty, imagine like the Los Angeles metro, that thing is huge, right? It's just like, you can't cover it in a day. When you get to individual neighborhoods, it gets really, really interesting. So we took, of large zip codes, we took the 15 that had the biggest decline in weekly restaurant hours across the US. So we filtered out like all the small zip codes. So sizable zip codes, the ones that had the largest, steepest, sharpest decline in restaurant hours. And we could see 14 of them here. The 15th, I'm going to leave a mystery for a little bit. But what do you see here, Beth?
So New York is not a surprise to us because, again, the high variable population. So people are not commuting in to go to the large office buildings. And also large tourist centers too. We're feeling the burn a lot during the pandemic. New Orleans is an interesting story too. This is actually the zip code that I live in presently. But I spent a lot of time in New Orleans during the pandemic, and it was super closed up down here, no tourist action. You could walk from one end of the French Quarter to the other and not see another human being. It was crazy. And then unfortunately, when they were starting to build back up, they were hit with Hurricane Ida. So these restaurants, the smaller restaurants that, if you didn't have a generator, you lost all of your inventory when the power was out for several weeks. And there was just nothing that could be done about that.
Oh, that sucks. Yeah, I mean, so Lower Garden is the French Quarter, basically?
No, Lower Garden's not near the French Quarter. French Quarter still did pretty well.
Did okay.
That area is still very built up. It's just the smaller guys that weren't able to make it through.
I see.
After Ida hit.
Now, here's the amazing thing. I mean, this is 15 zip codes, the 15 that did the worst. Well, I don't know if you call it the worst. The 15 that had the biggest reduction in restaurant hours. 12 of the 15 are New York City, right? You have one that's Washington, and you have one that's New Orleans, and then you have one at the top, which actually leads everything, even more than the New York ones. So there's actually one zip code across the country that is even worse than all the ones we see in New York City and everything else on this list. And guess what? I'm not going to tell you what it is today, because we're going to unveil this at a presentation we're doing next week. But if you come back to the next webinar, we'll tell you what that top zip code is. And it may or may not surprise you. So there's your cliffhanger for next time. So stay tuned. But I will give you some answers today. So we said before that you had brands like Denny's maybe losing some hours versus where it was before, because they had 24-hour stores that are no longer 24 hours. Then you have brands like Wendy's that gained some hours because they started offering breakfast. There's a total of 3 different brands on this list out of 10. We just sort of picked 10 at random that actually gained hours. I already told you that Wendy's is one of them. Can you guess the other 2 on this list that saw a net increase in hours since COVID? So 7 have a decrease, 3 have an increase. I already told you what one of the 3 is, which is Wendy's. Can you guess the other 2 in chat? Those ones I think are a much harder thing to guess, because you have to really think about, did they change their operation? What type of cities are they in? What type of customer are they trying to serve? Are we getting any consensus at all in what people are guessing?
It's a wide range, but there are a lot of guesses for the 2 cookie places, Insomnia and Crumble.
So one of those, I believe, is right. The other one, I believe, is not right. And we could see the actual numbers over here. So Crumble did increase its hours a little bit. Wendy's really increased its hours because it's open earlier for breakfast, right? It didn't have breakfast previously. Carl's Jr. also saw a net increase in hours. Insomnia, which is sort of funny because the name suggests otherwise, actually saw a pretty long decrease in hours. And I think a lot of this has to do with the particular areas that some of those stores are in, which are challenged for a lot of the reasons that Beth and Amanda mentioned recently. So this is what I wanted to get at, is we have seen such a dramatic, shift, not just across the country, not just within states, not just within metros, not just within zip codes, but on a brand dependent basis as well. That we have to really realize we have a very different industry today than we did previously. I know when you look at the top line number, like, the total revenue for restaurants is growing a little bit or about the same, or maybe change a couple percentage points. That ignores how totally differently constructed that number is from all the little bits and pieces beneath it in terms of zip codes and areas and brands and day parts. There's just been so much that has actually changed. you might remember a little while back, we showed this chart as part of our one table research, and this is the percentage of operators that say they're sort of short-staffed in different parts of their operation, and that so many say, oh, we are like super short-staffed in our line cooks and short order cooks, but also in many other areas of their business too. They've had a tough time of it, right? And right now, 65% of operators are hiring less qualified staff. So this is a survey we just fielded. 65% of operators acknowledge that we're hiring less qualified staff than we either used to or would normally want to. So what does this mean? Well, for some places, if you're a chain and you can make the capital investments, maybe you can invest in stuff that makes so you don't just need as much staff as you used to, right? So here's the Miso Robotics Flippy thing, which does like fries and other appetizers. I think they rolled out a bunch of stuff across many White Castles and other chains. Panda Express developed a robot walk. All these things being done with AI or to automate other parts of the restaurant process. But again, really chain restaurants that are doing it. And if you look at the change in hours, big chains held up much better than independent restaurants. Independent restaurants closed the most, or closed earlier the most, more so than large chains. And when we asked operators, what do you think is going to get better or worse? A lot of them actually think that the labor situation is going to improve in the future. They're not so sure about inflation, but I think the labor situation is going to probably get better. So hopefully they're right about that. And I wanted to close today out with a couple of just final quick polls and get your takes on this. So forget anything that we just showed you, but just what is your sense on what's going to happen with the labor market in the coming 2 years? We'll use 2 years as our benchmark period. Will the labor shortage as it is today continue without much improvement, or will more workers become available, making it easier for businesses to staff up? So are we going to still be very, very, short labor, or, will there be a recession and more people available in the workforce, or something else that makes it easier for businesses to staff up? And look, we don't have a right answer or wrong answer to this, because who the heck knows? I have an opinion, which I won't share just yet until we stop the poll. Let's give it another 5 seconds for get your vote in. 3, 2, 1. Amanda, split vote, or do we have a very heavily sided vote? Or what do you think it looks like?
I think somewhere in the middle. I think it's going to lean slightly towards the pessimistic side, but we'll see.
Well, which one's pessimistic? Because shortage is pessimistic, and there being a bunch of layoffs and more people are available is pessimistic as well.
I suppose I was thinking from the food service perspective, a shortage.
Okay, so
Being pessimistic. Yeah.
So 2/3 think its shortage will continue, and 1/3 think that more workers will become available. I have my sneaking suspicion is that we will see more workers become available over the next couple of years, but who knows? We don't really know. But I would like us to maybe accept that assumption for just a moment. If labor becomes available, operators tell us that they plan on staffing up more in the coming year. But if labor does become available and there's actually people that you can hire, do you think that restaurants will staff back up to their pre-COVID levels or not? Not just will they staff up, but will they get back to their pre-COVID levels of employment? Because if you look at, let's say, different sectors across the economy and where jobs are right now, in most industries, jobs are pretty close or even maybe ahead of where they were pre-COVID. If you look at, there's one industry segment where that's really not true, and that's leisure and hospitality, of which food service is a really, really large component. Will we ever get back to the however number of millions of jobs that we had? I think 15, 16 million, whatever it was, pre-COVID. Or do we think that companies doing robot waiters and robot chefs and whatnot, is that just going to replace the need for the people that we used to have? Okay, I'm going to end this with the poll. So I don't know if this is pessimistic or optimistic. Amanda, any guesses where this poll went?
I'm going to lean more towards no.
Yeah, you lean more towards no, and so did everybody. Well, so did most other people. So we generally think that there's going to still be a labor shortage, but even if there wasn't a labor shortage, we still wouldn't get back to the levels of employment that we had before. I think I agree with that second point, but we shall see. Okay, so just as a final reminder, we did one last piece of analysis. Again, I try to apologize up front for all these dots. We wanted to bring together these two great pieces of analysis that Beth and her team put together. One is the change in weekly open hours that we just talked about going across the bottom. And then the other is a change in number of restaurants that are actually open at all. So that openings versus closures dimension. And we plotted this across the 100 biggest zip codes in the US. So each one of these dots is a zip code. And what we found is that there is sort of a straight line that connects them. They're not independent at all, and they're not negatively correlated, certainly. The places where you saw the most number of, like, let's say, net closures are also the same places where you saw the biggest decline in weekly operating hours, right? So the places that got hit with more restaurants being closed are also the same places that got hit with the restaurants that continued just not being open as long anymore. And again, this gets all the way down to the zip code level. And I would bet this even gets down to the block level if we wanted to cut the data a little bit further. So very different environment. And the bottom line math is this: 3.9% fewer restaurants. That's that first number we saw. If you combine that with the set that we have 7.5% fewer hours at each existing restaurant, it means that together you have about 11.1% fewer total hours available across the restaurant industry. That's a big, big reduction. So if you're an operator, you got to figure out how to do a lot more with less. If you're a consumer, you actually have substantially less choice. And if you're talking about getting something to eat at 9 or 10 o'clock at night, you have way less choice than you used to. Now, the people that do want to do that are probably going to end up going with the chain restaurants that have drive-thrus that are open until midnight or whatnot. But all those independent restaurants that used to be there until 11, a lot of them just are not doing that anymore. And I think the bottom line for me is, what does it mean if you're a supplier to the industry or if you're an operator within the industry? This notion of doing more with less or with fewer resource means that you have to sort of overcome this with better versatility across products. So if an operator is buying fewer types of products, they have to be able to do more with each to be more efficient in the time that you do have available, and hopefully really leaning into creativity to do stuff that's just more interesting than everybody else is. I think this is the remedy. I don't know if we're going to get back to the same level of operating hours that we had pre-COVID. It just doesn't seem like that's likely to happen anytime soon. But I think if you lean into these three things, you'll be in a really, really good place. So as always, we went over accidentally. I apologize for that. But if Amanda, if you and Beth could hang on for just a minute as we close out, that would be fantastic. For those of you still with us that didn't have to jump onto a conference call or something, come back in 2 weeks. We will reveal the answer of that missing zip code that I promised. And we'll have a really fantastic new topic to discuss with really brand new data as well.